So very good evening to all of you. We welcome you to the Masterclass 9 of Practical Cities Initiative. Practical Cities is an initiative by a group of young practitioners aimed to have start a conversation around urban dream. Our vision is to have in place a framework for making cities more livable and sustainable. In the last masterclass, we learned about greening cities on World Habitat Day with RJ Dhwani. Today we are going to learn something very interesting, something very different. Today's masterclass is on reimagining urban rivers. Uh, for that, I would like to invite Dr. Victor Shinde from NIUA to this forum. Welcome, sir. Thank you for accepting our invitation and joining with us. Dr. Victor Shinde is a senior water management expert with NIUA. He leads the environmental division of a team that prepares master plan. He is also the team leader of the project with National Mission for Clean Ganga that is supporting the towns along the mainstream of Ganga to develop river-specific management plans. He has over 17 years of experience in diverse domains such as urban environmental management, integrated water resource management, water security enhancement, climate change adoption in water sector, sorry. Uh, he is a recipient of several awards and scholarship. He has over 35 plus publication in various journal articles, book chapters, conference papers, and knowledge product. Prior to joining NIUA, he worked as a scientist and a technical expert in 9 countries in Asia and Africa, which includes Bhutan, India, Japan, Mauritius, Philippines, South Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam. He has also worked closely with several international organizations on joint products such as GIZ, DART, IWMI, UNDP, UN Environment, USAID, and so on. Victor Sir holds his PhD in Urban Environment Management from Kyoto University, Japan, Masters in Water Engineering and Management from Asian Institute of Technology, and Bachelor's in Civil Engineering from Karnataka State University. So once again, sir, I formally welcome you to this forum.
Thank you.
Now, to give the background, our ancient civilization has not just perceived river as a source of water, but certain aspects of religion and culture are closely linked to it. There were some fragmented and miniature efforts in past regarding the cleaning of river, particularly Ganga, which has not led us to anywhere. If we see recently, it is perceived to have we have been given a significant priority, wherein the Prime Minister himself mentioned about river cleaning on several occasions. He even pointed out the need to of having a sustainable model of cleaning river Ganga. While if we see on the other side, Government of India has released a Namami Gange project, which is for cleaning the river Ganga. It was scheduled to be completed by December 2020, but not much of the work has been seen on the ground. To start with the conversation, I would like to ask a question to you, sir. What do we mean by urban river management? What are its key principles and the predominant components associated with it?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Yash. And before I answer that question of yours, let me also express my gratitude for having me on this program of yours. I genuinely like the idea of practical cities. When young practitioners come together and talking about different aspects about what affects the development of the country, right? So I am genuinely very enthused by what you guys are doing, and just hope to support in whatever way I can.
Thank you
So
so
thanks,
much.
thank you for inviting. Now, just to come back to your question, what is urban river management all about? Now, of course, I have a full presentation on that, a small lecture, which I will share in a little while from now. But at this stage, let me just say that the concept of urban river management is not very new. It's been there for quite some time. It's just that the knowledge around it has improved so significantly, right? So once which was just perceived as cleaning, now has metamorphosed to a very holistic way of doing things, right? So the philosophy The philosophy has matured over a period of time, and it is exactly that part that I will discuss in my lecture today, right? So also just to point out to something that you mentioned in your introduction, yes, the Namami Gange program was established in 2014, and essentially the work that I will be sharing with you today is in association with the Namami Gange program, right? So they have actually done quite a few significant achievements. Over a period of where the Ganga River is a huge, it's the largest basin in the world in terms of the population it supports. So the challenges are numerous. There are so many things, but despite that, there's a lot of good and innovative work that has been done by the mission. All right, and I think it's and this has also been recognized by the Prime Minister. What we want to, in fact, what I want to kind of specify very strongly or emphasize on is the connect between the river and cities, right? Because most of the problems in the rivers invariably are caused by the cities. So
Yes,
that I mean that's the bottom line, right? And this is the aspect that was actually highlighted by the Prime Minister as well. Is what can cities do for the rivers, right? Rivers are fine. You don't look at rivers just as a basin resource, but what can cities as operational units do for the rivers? Okay, and it is with that concept in mind. Of course, we started our work much before he made those comments, but then the philosophy is the same, right? So we are trying to see how can cities actually help, in maintaining the river. Okay, so I'll talk about that in a little while from now.
yes, sir. Like it is a very different topic. Like most of us, it is very new for most of us. So, sir, I would like to ask a question. Like, sir, if we see one of the blessing in disguise of this pandemic is that viewers' body has improved significantly. Like, few of the articles have also articulated that Ganga water is now drinkable. But if we see the with unlocking and human activities escalating, how will we be able to preserve such benefits which we have got?
No, absolutely, absolutely. I think this has been all over the papers, newspapers, and in the news items that because of the lockdown, the quality of our rivers has improved. I mean, well, purely from a river's point of view, it would wish that this lockdown extended forever, but unfortunately, that is not what happens. So we come back to normal,
Yes,
and
sir.
as things go back to normal, I think there will be some deterioration that happens. But I think more importantly, this whole lockdown has taught us one lesson, that if you leave the rivers alone for some time, they can heal on themselves, right? They can
Yes,
rejuvenate, right? And that's the important takeaway lesson that we should take from this lockdown. That if the rivers are given enough time, to rejuvenate, they can do it automatically. You really don't need to do anything about it, right? It's just a matter of having that sustained, uh, I would say a little bit of a balance between the development activities and the conservation activities, because it can't be purely conservational, of course. Okay, cities are going to grow, so there's bound to be development, but that optimal balance, giving the river that space, and more importantly, respecting the threshold that the river is able to absorb naturally, right? So our challenge now, going forward, beyond this lockdown, is to arrive at that, to to meet that threshold. I won't say meet, but to respect that threshold of tolerance that a river has. Yes, so let me just now share my screen.
yes, sir.
Okay, great. Right. So yeah, what I wanted to actually talk about today, is reimagining the management of urban rivers. Right. Uh, like I already mentioned in the context setting, that this is actually a part of a project that I'm currently doing with the National Mission for Clean Ganga. It's a kind of a joint project. Although this project is kind of confined to the Ganga River basin, it is pretty much applicable to any river city, not just in India but perhaps the world, or at least the developing world, right? So the idea is, to share with you, something very unique that we have attempted through this project, and hope to also trigger some thinking, because I know a lot of the audience here are young people, young students, well, perhaps young practitioners. Yeah, just to catalyze some kind of thinking, regarding the urban rivers, because ultimately it's a concerted effort from a wide group of stakeholders, that will actually help bring about a change that we envisage, right? So I'd like to begin with one slide here, which is a very obvious question. Whenever you say reimagining something, the first question to comes to mind is why do we need to reimagine, right? I mean, isn't the existing imagination good enough? I mean, what is the problem with the existing imagination? So to do that, I want to show you one picture. Okay, it's a very common picture, and somehow this is always associated with river management. Right? This is the only thing that is associated with river management. Right? So it is just one dimension. So whenever we talk about river management, whether it is urban or thing, it is keep the river clean. Right? It's that single message that you kind of get whenever you're talking. Okay, and that is something that we want to change, right? Because river management is not just about pollution. Pollution is one part of it, right? Keeping the river clean, that is just one part of it. But managing urban rivers is much more than that. It's actually rejuvenating the entire river, reviving the entire river, which comprises of several components, several elements. Things like wastewater pollution and solid waste. Okay, these are the usual suspects. So which is always captured anyway through any cleanup activity. But then there's also things like abstraction. Rivers are drying up in certain parts of our country and certain parts of the world, right? Because there's just indiscriminate abstraction from the river. So that needs to be managed, right? Erosion needs to be managed because of deforestation. There's a lot of sediment load that is going into the rivers. Now you might think, how does that matter? But sediment actually upsets the whole aquatic life balance, right? Certain species are not tolerant to sediments, so they have to kind of go upstream, and it kind of disturbs the whole balance, right? So erosion is another thing that needs to be managed. Of course, a very important thing that is now beginning to get a lot of traction last 10 years or so is environmental flow, right? Of course, you need the water for human activities. You need water for socioeconomics development, but the environment also needs water, right? So in its simplest term, environmental flow is the minimum flow, or is the flow that is required to sustain a natural habitat or a natural ecosystem. So that also needs some kind of a managing. Then there's encroachment. Now this is pretty rampant in our rivers, right? As a city develops, it expands. Invariably they encroach into the floodplains. Invariably, they take up more and more space of the river. That needs to be managed. There's riverfront development, right? So riverfronts actually are very wonderful avenues to connect the river with the city. It serves as a very nice interface. It brings the river, right to the frontier, right? But that needs to also be managed in a very sustainable and a proper way. Again, religious implications. This is very common, and a very applicable actually in our context, in the Indian context, where rivers are there's a there's a very spiritual value attached to the rivers, right? So that also, so it kind of sometimes makes it difficult to take certain steps, certain actions. So that has to be done very sensitively. That management has to respect the sentiments, while at the same time ensure that the environment doesn't get degraded, right? And then there's livelihoods, right? uh, the river supports through its ecosystem a vast number of livelihoods. The year I've just shown a picture of fish, but fish is just one part of it, right? There's so many livelihoods that a river supports, right? So that also becomes part of managing the urban river. The river economy, tourism activities, stuff like that. So in other words, the point I'm trying to drive here is the management of urban rivers is not just restricted to pollution. There are so many things, and I've just captured a few. I'm sure there are quite a few more. I just don't have space on my screen, so which is why I did not put many more. But the message is clear, right? So urban river management is a very multidimensional aspect. It's not unidimensional. There are a lot of things that need to be considered. And now if you look at this screen carefully, what you will see is you can kind of categorize this whole interventions or the whole management agenda, into distinct categories. One clearly is the environmental part, right? So there are a lot of environmental features of any management strategy for the river. Then there's something on the social aspects, right? Quite a bit on the, and finally there's something also on the economic aspect, right? So environmental, social, and economic, right? So if you just talk about these things, the first thing that comes to mind is the sustainable development, right? So the managing the river itself is probably an embodiment of how you achieve, of how you can roll out a principle of sustainable development. And it is with this thought, and it is with this background that we came up, or with this framework that I'm going to present to you now, about how to manage, or how to reimagine the management of urban rivers, right? So the reimagining here is essentially moving away from cleanup and scaling it up, and moving away and looking at multiple dimensions of, of river management, and then encapsulating all of it into a framework. Yes. So that's what reimagining is, right? So we are trying to, through this work, through this framework, we have put it into the three pillars, I would say, of sustainable development: social, environment, and economy. You look at all the aspects together, in an integrated way. That is when the holistic management of rivers becomes possible. Okay, to begin with, then let me just start quickly. In fact, this is a term that I'm going to repeat, acronym that I'm going to be saying quite a bit: URMP, which is the Urban River Management Plan, right? And what exactly is the URMP? So, a little bit of a context before this. Uh, as part of this project, we have created this framework for urban river management plans, which will be, at some point in time, hopefully very soon, adopted by all the river cities in the Ganga River basin. Right? To begin with, they are the ones who will adopt this to demonstrate, to protect the rivers, or to manage the rivers within their stretches. And then sooner or later, we hope that it will be scaled up to the rest of the river cities in India. Right? So that's the kind of a little bit of context to it. Right? So just to understand, or how do we define, the urban river management plan? It's actually an integrated approach to manage the river and its associated elements in a city sustainably. A very simple, kind of a clear, articulate definition that we have kind of given for this URMP. Now, I highlighted three words here, which are the key words in this whole definition. Actually, the first is integrated. Right? So this essentially means, if you look at the slide that I showed you with all those circles, there are so many circles on that screen, right? It's impossible for one agency to manage all those circles. Right? So, which is why that integrated approach is needed, because it's essentially a concerted effort among all the agencies that are managing the different elements of, river management. The integrated also means it's not only planning, we are also looking at projects, right? It's a mix of planning and project. Certain things can be planned, it goes into the master plan, it goes into the development plan, but then there also have to be certain projects, tangible projects. So it's a kind of an integration of planning and implementation together. The next is the next highlighted term was associated, right? So, and this is very interesting, right? So when we talk about the rivers, it's not only the river that needs to be managed, right? There are a lot of associated features with it. There's things like water bodies, wetlands, nalas, or drains, that are anyway intrinsically connected to the to the river systems. For that matter, even the groundwater, right? So the management system is not only looking at the river, okay, the framework, but it looks at all these associated elements as well. And that's what that systems thinking, that systems understanding or approach, that comes into the picture. And finally, the sustainable, which I just explained on the previous slide. So it's not purely environment, okay, but it's also environment and social and economic, right? So it's that multifaceted style of management that needs to be incorporated. Right? Now, whenever you start preparing a framework, whenever you start preparing something, there's always some thinking that goes on, a kind of a drawing board. What's the philosophy for this? What's your initial thinking? And that is what we had. So when we started off with this framework, there were certain things that we were very clear, that were kind of non-negotiable. Right? So this is something that we need to kind of adhere to, and this would form the basis of the whole framework. So the first thing is it had to be simple. That this was very important to us, okay, because first thing, a number of cities have to apply it. If you have a framework that the entire country has to apply, it has to be simple. Now, by being simple, I don't mean it is not based in science, right? It is still very scientific. It's still very scientifically robust, but not necessarily scientifically elaborate, right? So you don't have these long equations and stuff like that, but it's necessarily, of course, it's still rooted on a scientific background, right? So that's what when we mean by simple. Second, of course, like I said, since it has to be applied to all the cities, so it had to be a little bit generic, but at the same time replicable in all the others, all the other parts of the country. Third is sustainable. This is important, because a lot of the times plans are prepared, and then they are just left alone. There's hardly anything that happens after that, right? So this was something that we wanted to avoid, which is why the financial angle, the finances, form a very integral core of this framework, right? So making sure that every intervention under the URMP has that financial impetus, or that financial backing to it. And synergistic. This I think is really, really important, because what happens is, again, I'm just going back to that slide where I showed you all those circles, the different elements of river management, which are also managed by different agencies. Most of these agencies already have some plans, right? It's for example, if you have a tourism department, a tourism will normally have some plan. It's an irrigation department, it's a public health department, right? So the urban river management plan is not out of the blue. It's not trying to overarch anything, right? It's just trying to form synergies with the other plans. So it's trying to talk to the other plans. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If some part, if there is one agency which has a plan to manage the water bodies, for instance, right? So this is exactly, it's just feeding into the URMP. So the URMP, and that is the beauty of it, because it makes it a little bit more easy. So you don't have to do something out of the ordinary. A lot of the activities in the URMP is anyway done by many agencies. It's just now a matter of doing it in a coordinated way, right? So just talk to each other and then get those things done. And finally, it had to be measurable, right? Now this of course was very important, because once you roll out a plan, you need to know, uh, how is the plan progressing, how is the development progressing. So every 2 years, every 3 years, some kind of periodic monitoring of the plan needs to be done. And that is why we have kind of put this as measurable. So very quickly now, just to give you an overview of the framework before I go into the details. So these are the elements of the urban river management plan. Like I said, it is the three core elements. One is the environment, then you have the social, and then you have the economic. Right. So these are the three big elements. Now, for each of these elements, we have a vision, okay, which is kind of applicable to all the river cities in India. For each vision, there are certain objectives, right? Objectives are target statements. What is it that we want to achieve, or how do we actually get to the vision, right? So some very definitive target statements. These are in terms of the objectives. And then the interventions. Interventions are more in terms of the actions. You have an objective, but then now how do you achieve that objective is through a set of actions, through a set of, and that is essentially are the interventions. Then there's an M&E, which is a monitoring and evaluation mechanism to monitor the whole work. And finally, financing, right? In terms of what where the money is going to come from for each of these interventions, right? Now, if you notice, there are two colors I have used on this screen. One is green and the other is blue. So what the idea is, this framework, if I just go back a few minutes in this presentation, I said that this framework had to be applicable for all the cities, but at the same time, each city is different. You people are probably from Ahmedabad, so Ahmedabad is different from Delhi, or Delhi is different from Meerut is different from Patna, so on and so forth, right? So, well, it's fine to have a generic framework, but it's also important to capture the very city specific elements into the framework as well. That's when that's when this framework becomes more meaningful, right? It just can't be a blanket uh, statement or a blanket framework for all, which doesn't look at the site specific nuances, right? So now to integrate that, here's what we kind of approach it. The green elements that you see, so these are common for all the cities. Right? Every city will have the same elements: economic, social, and environmental. Every city will have the same vision for the river. There'll be same objectives, pretty much the same monitoring evaluation mechanism. But what will change are the interventions and the financing. I'll come to the interventions first, right? So what we're trying to say here, if my objective, the one of the objectives is get rid of the pollution. I'm just taking a very simple example, getting rid of the pollution, right? Now the city decides how it wants to do it. Like Ahmedabad may say that, okay, in my case, I'll probably strengthen my sewer system because that is the need of my city. But maybe some smaller city, I would say Jhansi or some place. Well, Jhansi is not that small, but just as an example, would say, I'll probably go for a fecal sludge and septic treatment. So the thing here is the interventions that cities take, it is their choice. So these are not mandated. The green elements are pretty mandatory, are fixed elements, but the blue elements, the blue boxes, these are the variable things, right? So this the city decides based on what its context is, right? Okay, and that's how we introduce, or that's how we capture the site specific nuances, into this framework. Similar with financing, right? Not all the financing, like city can decide where it gets its financing from. You can't kind of have a definitive framework there as well. Some cities might look at CSR. There are different missions through which they can get the money. So it is something that they decide on their own, without having some overarching principle on that, right? So that's how the framework is. Now, quickly, I'm just going to go through each of these elements over the next 10 to 12 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions after that. So just to understand what the visions are, right? Now, as I said, this vision is going to be common for all the river cities under these three elements: environment, social, and economic. Under the vision, it's a very simple and a very clear vision that the river will be able to provide a habitat for biodiversity to thrive. Right? That's the bottom line. How do you know a river is healthy? You know it when the fish are healthy, right? The aquatic system is healthy. That's when you know a river is healthy. So purely from an environment perspective, the biodiversity to thrive, a habitat for biodiversity to thrive, that's the vision. In terms of social, the river will be celebrated among the citizens. In many cities, the river is, Delhi is a classic example. The Yamuna is relegated to the backyard. Nobody's really bothered about at least from a citizen's perspective. There's not too much connect with the river, except when there are religious festivals or something, right? But how do you bring it back? That's the social aspect, right? It will be celebrated as an asset among the citizens. And in economic, it will provide opportunities for economic development, right? That's the great thing about rivers. Rivers are not just uh, just a source of conservation, or just a source of, it's just not a natural asset. It is also an economic asset. But it has to be done, of course, in a very sustainable and a very proper way, right? But it provides lots of wonderful opportunities for economic development. So that's the vision. Now, under each of these uh, okay, like I said, the next block is in terms of the objectives, which again is going to be common for all the cities. Now, I'm going to take the environmental objectives first. uh, the first is to keep the water sources free from pollution. That's pretty very straightforward one, that you need to keep. Now you figure out how you do that. Each city, you kind of do your own analysis, do your own baseline, and now figure out what are the interventions that you would need in order to keep the water sources free from pollution. The second is to rejuvenate water bodies and wetlands. Okay, again, this is very important, like I said, because they're connected to the river systems, and they're also at some point in time, they supplement, or they have the ability to complement the river activities. For example, a rejuvenated water body will increase the groundwater recharge, into the ground. and at some point in time that water can be used, the groundwater can be used for consumption, so which then relieves the stress on the river itself, right? Same thing with wetlands. Wetlands are very, they're also called, it's a nice unique name given to it, it's natural wastewater treatment plants, right? They have the ability to actually naturally treat wastewater, so that kind of reduces the stress on the river. Now the river does not have to do so much work. So it's that's the reason why these need to be done, to ensure effective regulation of activities in the floodplain. Now, as planning people and the people from a planning background, you will understand this better. That the floodplains, it's really important to make sure that the activities are in sync with what is usually put in the master plans or the development plans, which usually are, well, I'm saying usually again, it's not always there, but usually respect the threshold that the river can manage. Right? So those activities need to be regulated to ensure adequate return flow into the river. Now, return flow, because a city, it's not just that the city has to take water; you also have to give back water to the river, right? So you take it, that's nice, but you have to also return some of it to the river in order for the river to then maintain its environmental flow, right? When you provide the water, when it goes back, it has to of course be good quality water, sufficient water. So that is one objective under this environmental agenda, to enhance the riparian buffer. Riparian is actually a strip of vegetation on either bank of the river, so which kind of acts as a very, which acts as a protection either ways. It protects the river from development activities in the city, and vice versa. When flooding and stuff happen, so it protects the city from the impacts of the river, right? So it's a very very important thing, but you hardly find this anywhere in our cities, right? But it's a very important and a significant thing to have, right? So that should be one of the objectives, perhaps not achievable in the short term, because a lot of these riverbanks are already encroached, but in the long term, at least, when things come up for redevelopment and slowly resettlement happens, things of those sort, that riparian buffer would need to be maintained to promote the conservation, recharge, and reuse of water. Right. Again, this is quite important, because yeah, the whole idea uh, of having recharge and reuse is to just ensure that there is less stress on the river. The river is not really stressed. Okay. So when you reuse a lot of water, obviously what happens, then you don't need to take up too much water from the river, right? So that is in terms of it, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to now show you certain interventions, like I said, and I'm going to run through the next few slides. When we talk about interventions, like I said, interventions are just the projects or the ideas, the actions that a city needs to take to meet a particular objective, right? Now, in terms of social, the two objectives that we have kind of established. One is to inculcate river-sensitive behavior, which is very important. It's the fundamental step. Once that behavior, river-sensitive behavior, is there, it's then you can kind of scale up any level of ambition with respect to social engagement, which is exactly the next one. Is that once the sensitization happens, then let's engage the citizens in river management activities. That's a stepped up. It's like shifting from spectators to shifting, making that shift as spectators to actors. In objective number 7, it's more like spectators. You're just receiving the sensitization, but objective number 8 is now once you receive it, let's put this. Let's take some action, and including the people in the management activities, and finally the economic. Uh, Two objectives here again: to develop eco-friendly riverfronts. Now, riverfronts are very important, because like I said earlier, they help connect the river to the city, so the river doesn't become isolated, or it's not relegated to the backyard, right? So it's a wonderful way to bring it from the backyard to the front yard, but of course it has to be done in a very environmentally friendly and a river sensitive way. And finally, number 10 is to leverage on the economic potential, because the river, like we said, has a lot of economic potential, and leverage on it. I should have added one more word. It's sustainably, right? Leverage in a way that that kind of respects the threshold of disturbance that a river can handle. Right. So now coming to interventions, like I said, in the next few slides, I'm just going to run through them. The idea is, every city can decide what it wants to do. Right? The objectives are fixed. The objectives are pretty much unshakable. Okay, but then the interventions, the actions that a city takes, in order to meet those objectives, this is their choice, right? And pretty much what we are saying is the interventions would be on two broad categories. One is the project based, actual projects, and certain things are planning based, because some of the interventions can actually go into your regulations, like a master plan. If a new master plan is being prepared, identify a river zone, a no development zone, things of those sort. Planning based intervention, right? Because that is it's a mix of these two interventions. Okay, very quickly. For example, the first objective, to keep the water sources free from pollution. Right? Here is an example what a city can do. It can develop a citywide fecal sludge and septage management plan. Right? This typically will work for a good smaller cities which don't have centralized networks. The centralized sewage systems, these are expensive. It takes time for them to install. But you can have an FSSM plan, which works pretty well. Right? So that's one intervention that they can update. So to rejuvenate water bodies and wetlands, this is a pretty straightforward thing, and there are so many guidelines. I've just put some guidelines about CPCB, the Central Pollution Control Board, right? Here, it's a very standard way of doing it. Well, standard way of perhaps standard is not the right way, but then it's just one thing that needs to be done, that is rejuvenating the water bodies. Of course, the flexibility is there in terms of how you want to beautify it, whether you want to just keep it natural, whether you want to introduce a little bit of public interface to it. That's completely up to the system. But there are certain guidelines that can help cities do it to ensure the regulation of activities, right? Now here again, things like if a master plan, and we have produced one very interesting document which is on our website. If anybody's interested, please take a look. How do you actually integrate management of the river into a master plan when a master plan is being prepared? So what are the elements? The master plan is a very powerful document, right? So it's a legally binding document. Things like no development zones, land use assignment, permissible use zone, use premise, FAR ground coverage at least in the floodplains. There are agriculture pockets. So many things. Actually, a master plan has control over. Which ultimately will benefit the river, right? So this is something that can actually uh, be taken up. Again, return flow, like I just explained, it's how much of the water you return back to the river, right? So this is a case actually from Colorado in the US. It's just a schematic, but then the return flow essentially is the treated wastewater. In this city, they're all the treated wastewater. Some part is of course recycled and used into the system, and then some part is then given back to the river. Enhancing the riparian buffer. Here again, it's a very nice diagram of how do you, again, it's a very standard procedure that you need to have this plantation, but can do it in a very scientific manner. Right? So there are different zones where different plantation strategies or different trees can be planted. Conservation, recharge, and reuse of water. Again, I've shown an example here of an urban recharge basin. When you have a slightly large park or something, which is favorable for recharge. So that can be taken up as a special project under this objective. Inculcating river sensitive behavior, the objective. An example is just formulating a very nice IEC strategy for river management, and there are guidelines everywhere. In fact, I will just show you a document that we have produced, which pretty much says that there is no need to look for knowledge or dig up. It's already there. It's just a matter of referring to it and now preparing your own interventions that would be required. Engaging citizens in river management activity, right? I've just pulled up some pictures from my previous assignment when I was in Thailand, where we actually got school children to go to the river and monitor the health using these bugs. These are called macroinvertebrates. These are very, very small bugs that are found in the rivers, and each of these bugs is very unique because it has a pollution tolerance limit or a pollution tolerance score. They have different thresholds for pollutions, right? So using those catch, the number of bugs that you find, macroinvertebrates that are found in a sample, that can provide an indication of how healthy or not a river is. And the fact that children are doing it means it must be simple, right? So it's very simple, and this is how you can engage people, in urban management. Eco-friendly riverfronts, so and there's also always a misconception that riverfront needs to be a big promenade kind of a thing. It's not that. It can be a small thing as well, right? Like what I've shown down here, it's just a small biodiversity park. which is connected to the river, right? So you have various options, in terms of developing eco-friendly riverfronts. It just does not have to be something like a Sabarmati. It can be something very different as well. And here, some principles of how you go about going for this eco-friendly design, leveraging on the economic potential. So you have river markets, various places, even in India now. Srinagar has one, Kolkata has one, right? So it is upcoming. So these are wonderful opportunities to tap into the economic potential of rivers. There are water sport activities as well, so on and so forth. Right. Now, coming to the last two, right? When I said that there's a need for a monitoring and evaluation mechanism, so as part of this framework, we have come up with an index, which is called a Urban River Management Plan Index, and this index essentially looks at all the 10 objectives, which I just presented. There are 10 objectives. So somehow this index needs to measure, and it does this through indicators. So there is one indicator to measure each objective. Again, we are trying to keep it very simple, just simple. One indicator per objective, and then that we combine all those indicators, and that forms a kind of an index. So that index. So this is I won't go into details for this, but I just wanted to kind of show you that this is a very robust monitoring system that we have kind of proposed. And finally, I'll just take maybe a couple of minutes on the financing part, right? Because this is a little important. Ultimately, this is the make or break. Plans can be grandiose, plans can be very nice, but if there's no money, it kind of fizzles off, right? So the whole idea here is there are a city has access to a lot of funds, you know, uh, funding sources, things like viability gap funding, urban missions. You have the Amrut, you have the smart city, Swachh Bharat, so on and so forth. The ULB has its own funds, Center State Finance Commission, the Campa funds for afforestation, CSR, entry fees. So the whole idea is there is a lot of funding sources that are there, and on the other hand, there are specific elements of the urban river management, that can be matchmaked with the public, with these kind of funds. For example, the viability gap funding. This typically is for infrastructure projects, right? It's typically so that can easily take care of, or I mean, your any intervention under pollution control, which requires infrastructure, or river tourism, which requires infrastructure. So that can be channeled through viability gap funding. Same thing, urban missions. You have the smart cities, Amrut, Jal Jeevan Mission, now which has just come there, Jal Shakti Abhiyan. All these missions, they have specific areas where they are able to fund. Like for example, Amrut mission, it's quite a bit on water and wastewater infrastructure. So anything regarding that can actually be funded under that. The Jal Shakti Abhiyan is you can fund a revival of a water body. Then the Jal Shakti Abhiyan funds can be used for that. Similarly, the ULB has funds. The central science, like I'm just putting up this mapping here, that uh, at the end of it, it's just a way of smartly planning it. The money is all there. The money is it's just a matter of doing a little bit of matchmaking, and just trying to figure out where the funds are going to come from. And finally, the question that we get asked a lot is, what is the benefit for the city, right? Okay, URMP the bana diya, but what is the benefit for this? And here is what I say, there are innumerable benefits. Of course, you have environment, you have rich biodiversity. If you kind of do this over a period of, like, the URMP is not a 1 year exercise, it's not a 2 year. It'll probably have to be done for short-term interventions and long-term interventions over a period of 10 years, I would say. Okay, but the end of it, you'll have richer biodiversity, you'll have clean water, you have clean air as well, because the riparian buffer, it's essentially forestation, right? And that kind of cleans up the air, at least in that vicinity. Your groundwater levels will be enhanced. So a lot of environmental benefits. Social benefits, it's a vibrant place for religious events, vibrant place for cultural events. You'll have beautiful picnic spots. It's essentially, like I said, it's connecting the river to the people, and this is what it gives you. Improved livelihoods in terms of economics, the tourism growth. It'll also attract external investments, right? Now here, just 30 seconds to tell you a very interesting anecdote. Well, not anecdote, but an incident. When I was in my previous position, HSBC, this bank HSBC, so they had approached us and they wanted us to do a little bit of a study on the water security of certain areas. I won't name those areas, but yeah, certain areas. And we were wondering, why do they want us to do that? a bank interested in water security, and that's when we figured out, so they wanted to do that analysis so that they can decide where to invest. So the bank is not going to invest in areas which is less water secure. They will also invest in areas where the security is high. Right? So the moment you do a URMP, you are beefing up the whole uh, uh, the water or river setup in the city. So you kind of create a window to attract external investments. It makes it more attractive for foreign direct investment or any other investment to come into the city. Right? So that is a very and that is something that cities will understand. When like it helps to grow up the economic ladder. So there are so many benefits that this URMP has. Again, this is my last slide here. So this whole thing that I just mentioned in the last 25 or 30 minutes, is essentially encapsulated in these two documents, right? One is, of course, how do you mainstream urban river management into a city's master plan, and then the other is this whole framework that I just talked about. Page by page, detailed. It's a 54-page document. Anybody who's interested, please go to our website at NIUA, and you'll be able to take a look. Right. So with this, I want to just stop here, and just say that uh, this is a very exciting project. Something that we have put in a lot of effort, and we are genuinely passionate about, right? And then we hope that in the days to come, we are now implementing this in the city of Kanpur. Kanpur is going to be the first city in India which will have a URMP, and then hopefully the other cities will then follow, right? So it's just now moving, like I said, reimagining. Don't look only at pollution, look at the big picture, look at the whole thing, right? And Kanpur is going to be the first city that actually does that, right? So thank you so much for providing me with this opportunity to share this interesting work with you guys. I hope you will, if there are any questions or anything that you have, please feel free to reach out to me. I think my email address would be circulated. I'll be happy to have any further conversations with you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was very insightful and like such kind of a thing are not reaching to the people. Like such initiatives, such exercises still taking place, but it is somewhere we are lacking in connecting to the stakeholders or like as a knowledge product.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for this insightful presentation. And so I would like to ask a question. Like, uh, it is generally observed that the river rejuvenation or urban river management are not a part of a master plan, which are a statutory document.
Yeah.
And as you are working with Master Plan Delhi, if we take the case of Delhi, Delhi is a major the source of pollutant to the river Yamuna.
Yeah.
So how are these aspects incorporated in the master plan which is being prepared right now? That is MPD 2040.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Josh. Yeah, that is a very relevant question. You rightly pointed out that Delhi, the Yamuna actually passes. There's a 22-kilometer stretch in Delhi, which actually is responsible for almost 70 to 75% of the pollution in the entire river. Right, it's just that 22-kilometer stretch. So Delhi has actually, has been the main culprit, if you have to say it that way, for the Yamuna. Right. Now, how I'm also working on the master plan for Delhi 41 2041, and essentially whatever I have just talked about here now. No? So we have tried to incorporate everything, into the master plan for 2041, right? In terms of having no development zones, in terms of having very stringent FAR controls, FAR and ground coverage, especially for the floodplain areas to some extent. Typically, when you talk about floodplains, it has to be a 1 in 100 year period, 1 in 100 year return period, right? But here, when we in Delhi, we kind of use 1 in 35, right? Because a lot of the floodplain is already, we have a lot of built up on that, right? So, but whatever is remaining, 1 in 35 as well, right? So we're trying to have very strict controls over it, in terms of protecting, the river from development activities. And we additionally are also seeking to connect the citizens back to the rivers, right? So a lot of the interventions that are going in the master plan are also looking to establish that connect. So don't keep the river isolated. That's not going to work. You need that. You need to have that interaction with the people. Of course, in a very sustainable, in a very environmentally friendly way, right? It's just not that a heavy footfall damaging the river's ecosystem. No, not that, right? So all these things. In fact, we have just it's come up in something called as a green blue policy for Delhi. And these elements have been incorporated in the green blue policy, which ultimately then will be translated into the master plan. So I hope, I think in a couple of months or so, that green blue policy will be notified, and then it'll be for everyone to see how we have actually, looked at the river and given it its due in the planning.
Yes, sir. Like I guess like master plan Delhi is supposed to be like a benchmark in which the other cities will be following. Like
Yeah.
it would be very interesting to know about that policy. Thank you, sir, for enlightening us. If we see the Indian context, like certain religious activities are closely linked to rivers, like
Yeah.
and they are the major source of pollutants also. Like if we take the case of there are precedented examples such as like if we take the World Cultural Festival of Art of Living. Uh, now, what must be the kind of the nature of interventions like which need to be taken like to maintain a trade-off between the sustainability as well as the development of or the to have such activities.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. You're right there that uh, rivers are, they have a very intrinsic religious or a spiritual value in India. Okay, and actually that is also a strong point. Yeah, when it comes to urban river management, the idea is also to leverage on that spiritual value, because if there is a spiritual value, you tend to veneer it. Yeah, so you tend to revere it. Respect. There's a little bit of respect there, right? So going forward, I think these religious activities should not be looked as uh, uh, detrimental to the river health, but more as an equipment, to foster, to improve the condition of the river, right? So it's not really a challenge, but I think it needs to be treated as an opportunity. Right? So which is why I think in some places, these religious priests, the temple trusts and all, they are being brought on board, right, to help and pass on the message, that the rivers need to be protected, the rivers need to be uh, rejuvenated in the proper way. Now that as a philosophy, that works very well. The only problem happens, and you took the example that you took, is when those, when that kind of a mechanism flouts certain standards. It kind of flouts the uh, you know uh, you know the the laws or regulations, whatever, environment, from an environment perspective, right? So I think that part, it will only come through sensitization, right? People need to be aware. People need to be aware of what what, like, for example, like a floodplain. I don't think many people know what a floodplain is. They probably just say, I mean, what is the extent of the floodplain as well, right? So it all also starts with that sensitization. Once that sensitization comes, right, and then you have this religious community, or this religious faction, which you also bring on board. They're also a very important stakeholder in the management of the river, right? That sensitization, it's a mix of everything. And when this all comes together, it's only then I think we'll be able to have some hope, to achieve very sustainable and proper results.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And indeed, like it's a cumulative efforts, and all of us need to contribute to it. Sir, you mentioned like that Kanpuri would be the first city to adopt this framework. It would be very interesting if you can tell what is your experience.
Yes, Josh. So actually, this URMP, we are implementing this in Kanpur, which is the pilot city, the first city where this is going to be implemented. Uh, each of these 10 dimensions, I think by the month of November, mid-November or early December, the whole plan for Kanpur will be finalized. So we've been working very closely with the commissioner of the city, and he has actually been quite proactive in driving this whole agenda forward. Right. So our experience working there, of course, there are challenges. There is no city where you will not find any challenges, but then, like I said, challenges is also an opportunity. And I think in Kanpur there are more opportunities than challenges, right? There are just a few things, but so far it's been progressing very smoothly, right?
Thank you again, sir. It would be very interesting to know about more about Kanpur case when it will be published further. We would be looking forward to it, sir. And my last question for today's discussion is like there are various set of departments in if we see our ULB, like it has a water department, a sanitation department, garden departments are there, like. So should we have something like water body management department or something, or we should not have it, like, from your opinion?
Yeah. Well, actually, if you purely talk about water bodies, that typically will come under the municipal the municipal the ULBs. Okay, so there are within that, there are certain departments that actually look at it. If I take the case of Delhi, the water bodies are come under the jurisdiction of a number of things, like the Delhi Development Authority. They manage some of it. The Delhi Jal Board does it. The Irrigation Flood Control Department, the local municipal bodies, so on and so forth. So this idea about having a unified body to manage the environment or the manage has been floated for quite a few time, for quite some time now. But my personal opinion is that I think it's perfectly okay to have different agencies managing it, right? As long as there is a coordination among the agencies. So the point is that we want integrated management, not necessarily integrated governance. Integrated governance is difficult also. You just having one agency to there's a lot of setup that needs to be changed. It can be done. I'm not saying no, but it just seems to be too much of a hassle, right? What I think would perhaps work better in the Indian models is integrated management, right? Where you still have agencies that do their own thing. You have your own jurisdictions, but at least there are channels open for communication, right? So I mean, just looking at, like, for example, I'm looking at the water management plan here. I'm sorry, the urban river management plan, right? So, for instance, a master plan, needs to be able to address all these issues in an integrated way. That's one. A city's, uh, let me say, the flood management department should be able to talk to the groundwater management department, right? Because a lot of the flood can actually be diverted to to underground aquifers through stormwater capture and certain other things. Similarly, wastewater recycle, when you're talking about wastewater recycled and reuse of it, they need to be able to talk to the horticulture department, for instance, because that is where it's going to be used, right? So the idea here is, while it is okay not to have a unified body, it will be very important for the agencies, the existing agencies, to have that open line of communication, right? So there has to be, Melbourne does that very well. Melbourne does not have different agencies, but every 3 months, every 4 months, there are these meetings where everybody comes together, they discuss issues, and then they take back what they have to, right? So Los Angeles, a lot of the water leaders leaders, water leader cities in the world, they actually have this kind of a model, where it's not really integrated governance, but it's more integrated management, right? And I think that model will work best in India as well.
Thank you so much, sir. It was very enlightening. Once again, I would like to thank you so much for coming to this forum and giving this a lecture. Like, it was very insightful and it was very different. Thank you again, sir.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Josh, and thank you to your team as well for having me here. It was a great pleasure. Like I said, activities such as this, I'm always very enthused and very excited about. So for me also, it is a very, it's a very inspiring moment for me, to be part of this initiative. And I wish you all guys, I wish you the very best, and I hope your initiative, flourishes in the days to come. Thank you
Thank
so
you again,
much.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Bye bye.